The subcommittee will come to order. I want to thank the members of the committee, our witnesses, and those who are in the audience today for taking the time out for appearing before this rare Friday a.m. subcommittee hearing. And the chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes for opening statements. Crowning a national champion in college football has long been controversial. Whether it has been decided by the AP Sports Writers poll or by the current Bowl Championship Series, fans of sports talk radio have always argued over which team deserved to be number one. While personally I favor some sort of playoff system to determine a national champion, as does President Obama, I understand and appreciate the history and tradition of the bowl system. However, criticism of the BCS goes beyond just a mere sporting interest in determining the team that most deserves to be national champion. This is indeed about money, and it's about money at taxpayer-funded colleges and universities. College football is big business, and the BCS strikes many critics as unfair from a financial perspective. There are 11 athletic conferences that make up Division I college football. Under the current BCS system, 6 of those conferences, the ACC, the SEC, the Big East, the Big 12, the Big 10, and the Pac-10 are guaranteed $18 million each to distribute among their member schools, while the 5 other non-automatic conferences, the Sun Belt, the WAC, the MAC, Conference USA, and the Mountain West Conference, only receive $9.5 million combined. Notre Dame, an independent school, automatically receives $1.3 million all by itself. How is this fair? How can we justify this system during these tough economic times when states are slashing their budgets and cutting spending on education? And let me be clear that we are not examining a trivial matter at today's hearing. Colleges and universities are funded by taxpayer dollars, and we have to ask whether or not the big, dominant conferences are engaged in uncompetitive behavior and negotiating contracts at the expense of smaller conferences and their schools. In other words, are the big guys getting together and shutting out the little guys? Such disparity in revenue distribution would arguably be justifiable were the schools from the automatic conferences simply better athletically than those from the non-automatic conferences. But for the past year and the past several years, this has clearly not been the case. Let's look at last year. Both the ACC and the Big East failed to produce a single team in the top 10 of the BCS standings, while the Mountain West and the WAC each had a team in the top 10, Utah and Boise State. Yet both the ACC and the Big East received almost $19 million each in BCS revenue, while the Mountain West received only $9.8 million, and the WAC received $3 million. On its face, this does not seem fair or tied to actual performance on the field. Nonetheless, I do want to keep an open mind on this matter and hear from our distinguished panelists today. I'm eager to hear from Commissioner Swofford and Mr. Fox on their views on why the BCS revenue is currently distributed, the way the BCS revenue is currently distributed, why it's fair and equitable to taxpayer-funded colleges and universities. I want this to be a deliberative hearing and a robust exchange of ideas. The BCS recently signed a new television contract with ESPN reportedly worth $125 million a year, starting in 2011. I would be interested to know how the BCS intends to distribute this considerable sum of dollars to colleges and universities across the country. Lastly, I just want to thank my friend, the distinguished ranking member and former chairman of the full committee, Mr. Barton, for his extensive and commendable work on this matter. Mr. Barton has some strong, I might say very strong opinions on this subject, and I appreciate his passion and commitment to exploring this issue among many other issues that this Congress is facing. Mr. Barton has introduced legislation on this issue, legislation that I have co-sponsored, and I sincerely hope that we can discuss this bill as well. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for appearing before us today, and I appreciate your travel to the nation's capital on a relatively short notice. And I yield back the balance of my time, and now I recognize the ranking member of the full committee, my friend from Texas, the one and only Joe Barton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have strong opinions. My strongest opinion on this issue is the fact that my team, Texas A&M, is never mentioned in the same breath as national champion for college football, but with Coach Sherman, maybe one of these days that will change. I, along with you, want to welcome our distinguished panel. This is not the Oversight Subcommittee, so we don't subpoena people to testify. You folks all came of your own volition when we asked you to, and we appreciate it. Both those of you who are proponents of a playoff and those of you who have some doubts about it. So we're extremely gratified you'd come on a Friday. When I was chairman of this committee, I held a hearing on the same subject 4 years ago, to just give attention to it. And at that time, in that hearing, I had hoped that through a spirit of volunteerism that the BCS would decide to go to a playoff system. That hasn't happened yet. It's interesting that people of goodwill, and I think everybody on whatever side of the issue you are on this one is a person of goodwill, keep trying to tinker with the current system, and it's to my mind a little bit like, and I don't mean this directly, but it's like communism. You can't fix it. It will not be fixable. Sooner or later, you're going to have to try a new model, and that's why we're here today. We've heard about the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat on ABC Wide World of Sports, but as Mr. Rush says, sports fans seldom think about the money. We're going to talk about the money a little bit today. Chairman Rush mentioned it in his opening statement, and it is, I think, an important reason why we do not have a playoff system. Last year, the so-called championship game had two teams that had each lost a game, but there were several other teams that had only lost one game, and there was a team that hadn't lost any games, Utah, that wasn't in the national championship game. If you had a playoff system, you wouldn't have that problem. The people in the playoff game, the championship game, would be there because they've beaten everybody else. No system is perfect, but why is it in the NCAA, every other sport, they give a championship, it's won on the field, or in the on the track, or in the golf course, or in the gymnasium. It's not won because two teams are kind of picked out of a hat, or as a result of a poll and a computer system, and allowed to play for the national championship. Several college coaches that are well known have said that they're advocates for a playoff system. Urban Meyer, who's the head coach of the current national championship team, Florida, has stated in the past that he favors a playoff. Nick Saban, Pete Carroll, the head coach at Texas, Mack Brown. In May of 2008, one of the winningest college football coaches of all time, Joe Paterno, said, and I quote, "I think you ought to win it on the field. I've always been for a playoff," end quote. We didn't ask the coaches of Boise State or Utah to be here today, but if they were here and testifying, I think they would say they were for a playoff. There are countless coaches, even a few university presidents, and believe it or not, the president, President Obama, who have stated that they think we need to have a playoff, the same as we have in every other sport. The more I think about it, the more people I talk to who really know college football, it's clearer and clearer to me that the reason we don't have a playoff system is a very green reason. It's not green environmentally, it's green money. It's that simple. As Chairman Rush has said, $125 million television contract, and all the other contracts that are not through nationally but through regionally. It's just too much money being made this way, and people don't want to change that. This is interstate commerce. This committee has every right to regulate interstate commerce. The bill that I've introduced, that Chairman Rush is a co-sponsor of, doesn't say there has to be a playoff. It simply says if you're going to advertise it as a national championship series and a national championship game, it has to be the result of a playoff. Otherwise, it's a false and deceptive trade practice under the Federal Trade Act. So you couldn't advertise. You couldn't get the money. You couldn't sell the T-shirts. You couldn't do all those things that you do under the current system. So it's not Congress being dictatorial. It's Congress saying truth in advertising. If we're going to have a national championship game, a national championship team, it ought to be the result of a playoff. I think equity is a factor here, too. My guess is when Mr. Swofford and Mr. Fox talk later, they're going to talk about the student athlete, as well they should. But it's interesting to me that we just added another regular season game. I don't see how that helps academics. And we're also playing college football on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Those are not normal evenings that our student athletes should be out on the football field. They should be in study hall or something like that. The reason that they're playing Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays is not because they're making straight A's in classes, although some of them may be. It's because their schools need the extra money, and their coaches are hopeful that the extra exposure, especially if they're from a non-BCS conference, might get a little bump in the polls and move up so that they might have a shot at one of the at-large bids in the BCS. Some movement has been made. I'm told that there was some discussion at the last BCS meeting, whenever that was, about a playoff, but that it was rejected. I think that's a step in the right direction. They're talking about it, but the real step is to go ahead and implement it. I don't buy the argument that you can't change because of television contracts. Those contracts have kick-out clauses. It'd be very easy to implement a playoff system. I also don't buy the argument, although I'm going to listen closely to Mr. Fox from the Alamo Bowl, that it would somehow destroy the bowl system or the mid-range bowls, things like this. They could be a part of the playoff system. They could be in addition to the playoff system. The NIT basketball tournament has thrived in the midst of a 65-team playoff for the college basketball championship. As I asked Mr. Fox off camera, if Texas A&M and Texas Tech were in a playoff and the first round was at the Alamo Bowl, I think the Alamo Bowl would do pretty well. So In any event, Mr. Chairman, I see my time is way over expired. I am for college football. I enjoy watching it. I enjoy going to the games in person. I have a wife who's a fanatic, University of Texas Longhorn fan. She had season tickets at Texas. So it makes some interesting Thanksgivings when A&M and Texas are playing in my home. I've had ham sandwiches on the back porch as much as I've had hot turkey in the dining room some of these last few years. But I hope we can work this out. And again, thank you for holding the hearing, and you gentlemen, thank you for testifying. You're at least to go on you're willing to go on the record, and as I told some of you privately, there's a whole bunch of heated intensity off the record, but there's not nearly as many people willing to go on the record, so we appreciate you being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair thanks the ranking member, and now the chair recognizes my friend, my classmate, the congressman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes of an opening statement. And prior to that, the chairman sees that the gentleman has a helmet. I don't know if are we going to engage in any kind of combat here on the hearing, or that's just a...
Mr. Chairman, that violates House rules, but I'm not going to object.
Mr. Chairman, I have a blue-collar district. We normally wear hard hats, just not this hard.
Okay, all right. Well, the chair recognizes the gentleman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding the hearing on this, and just for the public's interest, our Energy and Commerce Committee has been spending weeks and actually months now working on carbon sequestration and health care, and this is a much more fun to talk about. Because I'm actually here today, even though Congress is not, because I thought we were going to have some work on our energy work, and coming from Houston, Texas, that's awfully important in our community. But I'm glad that the chair of our subcommittee held the hearing and on Bowl Championship Series and NCAA Division I college football. I want to thank our witnesses, like my colleagues did, for traveling across the country. The problem you have two Texans here and only one fellow from Chicago. So you're going to have to listen a lot of UT, A&M, and in this case, University of Houston, because I know you traveled from across the country. Over the last several seasons, there's been growing frustration with the system and less than unanimous agreement on the teams that should be playing Bowl Championship Series national title game. The most recent title game this January is no exception. There was hardly agreement from professional commentators and fans alike that Oklahoma and Florida were the two best teams in the country. Now, I'm an alumnus of the University of Houston, and while it's been a while since the Cougars were at the top of the polls, my family's divided because my son went to Texas A&M, my daughter went to the University of Texas, and as we know that UT beat Oklahoma earlier in the year in the Red River Shootout, and many people thought they were a better team to contend for the national title. There were also two undefeated teams, Utah and Boise State, that were established themselves as top caliber teams over the recent years with bowl wins over larger schools and impressive regular season records, despite coming from conferences that do not receive an automatic bid into a BCS bowl game. The coalition conferences that do not receive an automatic bid to a BCS bowl game also receive significantly less money from BCS generated revenue, approximately half of the $18 million the automatic BCS conferees receive. While the coalition conference does receive a larger share if they place a team in the BCS bowl, the odds are so highly stacked against them as we saw last year with Utah and Boise State, they rarely have that opportunity. Last season, my alma mater, the University of Houston, actually won its first bowl game since 1980 when it defeated Air Force in the Armed Forces Bowl. If the Cougars program gets back to where it was in the late 70s, and when they finished fourth in the AP and coaches poll in 76 and fifth in 1979, I would hope they would have the opportunity to compete in the BCS Bowl. But with recent history has shown that under the BCS systems, odds are not in their favor since they are a coalition conference. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding the hearing and look forward to the fairness of the BCS system. I know our witnesses today are a number of different viewpoints on the issue, and I look forward to the testimony. In the sports pages and the college towns across the country, there is growing frustration that current system is significantly flawed, and I'm pleased Craig Thompson is here today because I've read several articles last week in the Houston Chronicle about your presentation of BCS and suggested changes. And while I understand may be still under consideration. And again, thank you for being here, and and appreciate the time today. But again, for the mass public who's worried about carbon and healthcare, we're working on those, but we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
The chair thanks the gentleman, and now the chair is indeed gratified to welcome our witnesses before this panel. Again, I want to reiterate our deep appreciation for you taking the time out from your very busy schedules to appear before this subcommittee. And I just want to assure you that this subcommittee, this chairman, and I believe that the members of Congress, the overwhelming majority of members of Congress, have a keen interest in this particular issue, and that this interest will will give us an opportunity to have some meaningful discussions and debate around this particular issue as we go forward. Before I swear you in, I just want to say that about a week ago I read in the USA Today a comment that was pretty derisive of the congressional involvement, the legislative involvement on this particular issue. And I can't remember the author of the statement, the gentleman that the statement was attributed to, but I can assure you, each and every one of you, that he was dead bang wrong. We are quite interested in it, keenly interested in it. Some indeed are very passionate about it, and I don't see it's not in the interest of college football for anyone to be dismissive of our congressional intent, responsibility, and our congressional commitment. So with that said, I'm going to welcome our witnesses, and I would ask you, because it's been a new practice of this subcommittee to swear in witnesses, so I would ask you to stand and please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Please take your seat. The chair now recognizes himself. Oh, I'm
We're willing to listen to you
right.
again, Mr. Chairman.
No, that's quite all right. That's all right. Let the witnesses.